Hi, this is Neil Armstrong from MediQuest with a little short video just to introduce the new Artificial Intelligence Act from the European Union, which is likely to have a significant effect on medical devices. So first thing to say about this is that it actually gives some useful information about artificial intelligence, and it talks about artificial intelligence needing to be trustworthy in the service of humans, human-centric. There's been a white paper that was out a little while ago that announced that this would be coming, and that said it was going to give a single future-proof definition of artificial intelligence. And in Article 3, it's come up with a definition. So it's lived up to that part anyway. For the purpose of this regulation, the following definition shall apply. 1. Artificial intelligence systems, AI systems, means software that is developed with one or more of the techniques, approaches set out in Annex 1 and can, for a given set of human-defined objectives, generate outputs such as content, predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing environments they interact with. So it's not just the UK and England that has left the European Union. It's clearly any knowledge of English grammar, because it appears to be acceptable in the definition of in an act that you end a clause with a preposition. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. How low can the European Union fall? Oh dear. I'm sorry about this, and I do appreciate it's a little bit pedantic. Well, anyway, this is their idea of fixing something for all time, and it's not actually saying what it is. It's saying you've got to look in another piece of legislation to find it. And hey ho, there is another piece of legislation to find it. It's the aforementioned Annex 1, which does a pretty good job of describing what we know today. So, machine learning approaches, including supervised and unsupervised reinforced learning, using a wide variety of methods, including deep learning. I think we've tried to throw all the buzzwords we could think of about learning into that one. We haven't got algorithm in there yet, but that's clearly where we're going. Logic and knowledge-based approaches, including knowledge representation, inductive logic programming, knowledge bases, inference and deductive engines, symbolic reasoning and expert systems. And also statistical approaches, Bayesian estimation, search and optimization methods. Well, that seems really to encompass just about everything that they could possibly have thought of at the moment. And the trouble is, as we stand on the brink of the quantum computing age, that probably isn't what it's going to be in the very near future. If the old in vitro diagnostic directive should have taught the European Union anything, it was that you don't make anything work for all time and to future-proof it if you rely on a list tucked away in an annex, because technology will just advance to prove you wrong. But alas, that's one thing that the European Union haven't learned yet. What was also announced as going in the white paper, as going to be in the new act, was that particularly harmful AI practices were going to be prohibited as contravening European Union values. And they've made quite a good attempt at some of this at any rate. In particular, they've clearly thought about some of the facial recognition techniques and grabbing facial recognition pictures from all sorts of places, as practiced in China, or most notably by the Welsh police. So these sort of things are going to be made illegal as they contravene European Union values. Oh dear, Wales has left the European Union. Oh well, the Welsh police can just go on collecting their surveillance data, I suppose. Safeguards to remote biometric identification and systems for the purposes of law enforcement. Again, particularly getting at facial recognition here, but obviously looking at other areas where people may be looking at getting at your DNA, various other things, your fingerprints, new and exciting ways to interact and open your PC and your phone. It also talks about solid risk methodology to define high risk, health and safety or fundamental rights of persons. We've sort of done a bit of that, and probably significant from our point of view is that by definition a medical device, anything coming within the scope of the medical device regulations, that's the MDR or the IVDR, will automatically be treated as high risk. So any artificial intelligence, any learning algorithm that you choose to include, any use of Bayesian statistical methodology that you choose to include, anything like like Google Translate being used from your app, that will now mean you've got a medical device that's working with artificial intelligence engine and put you under the Artificial Intelligence Act. Wonder if people have thought of this. Well, as artificial intelligence helper apps become more familiar on the web, this is clearly going to put a lot more things potentially in here. So by definition, anything that falls within the scope of the medical device regulations is going to be considered as a high-risk AI system. And that means it has to be regulated in a way that's going to be pretty familiar to us, because it's going to involve things like CE marking, a competent authority, a notified body. And on top of this, it's also going to involve a lot of concepts that are going to be particularly familiar to us, either from the GDPR or from the MDRs. So, transparency, surveillance, risk management, data governance and management, technical documentation, logging again coming from the GDPR, rather like transparency, not something we're particularly used to for medical devices. Human oversight, this supposedly comes from the MDR. I'm not too sure about that, but supposedly yes. Accuracy, robustness and cybersecurity. And this is one area where I really feel we're weak, and we're still weak, and this is an area that needs urgent attention from the European Commission. They have something like a QMS requirement. I think this is another area where we're going to regret 13485 and ISO 14971, our quality system and risk management standards, having been moved away from the standard ISO 9000 series of management standards into a little medical device pool just to suit international regulators. They've pulled them out of a series of standards which could really have helped us about sustainability, management, environmental protection, cybersecurity. It would have been much better if we could have stayed within that, and hopefully at a future revision we may be allowed to bring 13485 and 14971 back into the fold of general standards on risk management and quality systems. Economic operators, which are a familiar concept under all the new European regulations as well as the MDRs, again come in, and again we have post-market surveillance system, and we're looking for an amount of system integration. And I fear this is going to be a very problematic area, particularly where you end up with using a big company's artificial intelligence, potentially database and know-how. So you're using an IBM or an Apple or an Amazon to support you as a small startup medical device company offering an artificial intelligence product. Are you really going to be able to get the backup from the bigger partner to use the systems that you want to? Many medical device companies over the years have tried dealing with large software companies and just been told to go away. I don't think putting it in law is going to make it any more attractive for the large software companies to say, yeah, you can come and audit us, or for a small startup to actually go and do a meaningful audit of what Apple or IBM are up to. I think this needs a little bit more thought as to how this can actually be realised. Few articles in the same fashion I'd like to look at because I feel they can give us quite a problem. The manufacturer has to take responsibility for everything, comes in Article 24. Again, can a small startup company really take responsibility for the Amazon or IBM Watson or Apple engine that it wants to be using? Article 43 talks about an overlap of conformity assessment. And this works in with Article 63, Bullet 3, which says for medical device regulated products, the CA for the MDR will become the CA for Artificial Intelligence Act. And this really worries me, because looking at this together, what we're saying is they expect notified bodies and competent authorities for medical devices to be able to take on conformity assessment and regulation in the same way under the Artificial Intelligence Act. And we have a drastic shortfall in notified bodies by the lackluster approach to designating them by a lot of member states and the Commission, the over control that's trying to be exercised of them. This is just adding a whole new area of technology about which they know nothing and have very little experience. This really is quite going to be quite a problem area, I think. Article 29 gives us user obligations to use as intended. Now, one of the things I'd have thought we'd have learnt in the last year during the pandemic is that a lot has been done with medical devices, with medical technology in general, with drugs, with everything associated with healthcare treatments, purely because people have been able to use them off-label. And if we want perhaps to come up with IVD tests that can very rapidly detect new variants. We're going to do that using computers, using artificial intelligence engines. And that's not what was intended, because when these things were first put out there into the environment, people didn't know there was going to be a pandemic. And this is potentially a real obstacle to innovation in a time of crisis. And after the last year, you would have thought people would have known better than to put this sort of provision in there. There's also quite a worrying little sub-clause that says users have to log things, logs of use, and be aware of them to the extent that they're under their control. And again, this really worries me, that we're going to have artificial intelligence integrated as part of a medical device and allow it not to be under the control of the user. What happened to this bit about being under human control, being human-centric, not allowed to go off and do its own thing, potentially under some quasi-malevolent foreign corporation's control? Lots of potential worries here. And Article 45 does something that we haven't seen and we haven't got for any of the medical device directives or regulations that we've seen so far. It introduces a legal recourse against notified bodies. Probably about time too, but that's hardly going to encourage them to be any more responsive to manufacturers. I think when we look at this, it's a pretty good attempt. And I know I've been quite critical of it, but it's a difficult subject area and it's a pretty good first attempt. I don't think it's the end game by a long stretch of the imagination, and I think it falls lamentably short of some of its lofty aspirations. It is a reasonable attempt. Let's try and make the best of it. But there are real problems, and there are going to be problems for medical devices currently using artificial intelligence or currently using helper apps that may use some form of something that will come in this very wide definition of artificial intelligence. Anything that's a learning algorithm, anything that uses Bayesian statistical prediction. Wow. That's an awful lot of things that we might have wanted to use as a helper app to our software without actually putting artificial intelligence into a medical device. And now this is going to bring everything within the scope. I do think the big issue that we have to ask and we have to address is the elephant in the room. That we are a few days away as I'm recording this from the implementation of the medical device regulation. We've got less than a third of the notified bodies that have applied to date designated. Manufacturers are fast running out of certificates and transition time on their products. They don't even know if their notified body is going to be designated under the MDR, and they don't know if they're going to be able to upgrade or how they're going to be able to upgrade to be able to deal with artificial intelligence in a medical device. And how on earth are competent authorities who've proved so lamentably unable to cope with the technology changes in medical devices supposed to be able to suddenly come up to speed on the concerns around artificial intelligence? There's a lot of work to do to make this a realistic concept. I really hope the European Union appreciate this. Hopefully, we'll have some better news next time. Look forward to talking to you again soon.